This story is titled, I Ghosted My Ex 2.5 years ago. Now she tracked me down to make me raise her affair. Baby. Hi everyone. If you're enjoying these stories and want to support the channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It helps me bring you even more great content like this. Now, let's dive into the video. The original poster begins by saying, back in 2015, I met Casey in college. She was intelligent, funny, and we connected instantly. By 2019, we were in a serious relationship, and I believed I had found the person I'd spend my life with. So I worked tirelessly at my factory job, saving every penny to buy her an engagement ring. The plan was to propose on Christmas at her parents' house, thinking it would be the perfect moment, surrounded by family in a warm, festive atmosphere. Casey's family was unique. Her dad, Max, was laid back, quiet, respectful, and overall a good guy. Her sister, Sherry, was kind, sweet, and always supportive. But Jane, her mom, well, she despised me. No matter how hard I tried, nothing I did was ever good enough for her. She'd make snide remarks about how Casey deserved better, or how I lacked ambition. Casey would dismiss it, saying, "That's just how my mom is." I didn't believe it, but I kept trying because I loved Casey and hoped Jane would eventually come around. For Christmas, I went all out. I bought Sherry a laptop for college since she'd mentioned needing one, a nice barbecue grill for Max, and an expensive scarf for Jane. The scarf was a stretch for my budget, but I thought it might improve her attitude toward me. Casey was supposed to meet us after her hospital shift, so I decided to hand out the gifts early. Sherry cried when she saw the laptop, hugging me and saying it was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for her. Max seemed genuinely pleased with the grill, and even Jane managed a forced "thank you" for the scarf. For a moment, I thought things might finally be improving, but then Sherry started acting strange. She kept glancing at me, her eyes darting to Max and back, as if debating whether to say something. Eventually, she pulled me aside into her room, with Max following, looking confused. Sherry was already tearing up as she said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't want to ruin this, but I can't keep it in anymore." I had no idea what she meant until she handed me a pregnancy test. I just stared at it, completely frozen. It felt like my brain had short-circuited. "It's Casey," she said. "I found it last month." Then she dropped the bombshell. Casey had been cheating on me since early that year, and the guy was someone Jane had introduced her to. Sherry explained that Casey had begged her to keep it a secret because she was still figuring things out. I was speechless. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and my vision blurred. Max placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Son, I'm sorry. I understand if you need to leave." That snapped me out of it. I nodded, thanked Sherry for telling me, and shook Max's hand. As I walked out, I glanced at Jane. She was sitting on the couch, sipping wine, completely unfazed. I didn't say a word to her. I didn't trust myself not to explode. The drive home was a blur. By the time I reached my apartment, I was shaking with a mix of rage and heartbreak. I called my family and told them everything. My mom was furious, saying, "You're better off without her." My sisters were ready to confront Casey, but I told them to let it go. All I wanted was to move on. That night, around 11 p.m., Casey started blowing up my phone. She kept texting things like, "I can explain," and "Please, just let me talk to you." I didn't respond. The next morning, I changed my number, deleted my social media, and began erasing her from my life. It hurt terribly, but I knew one thing for sure. I deserved better. After Christmas, I felt like I was in survival mode. Cutting Casey off wasn't just about avoiding her calls and texts. It was about protecting myself from everything she represented. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was humiliated, angry, and stuck replaying every moment of our relationship, trying to figure out how I'd missed the signs. She tried everything to reach me. calling from blocked numbers, sending emails, even contacting my family. Every message was the same. "It's not what it looks like," or "You're misunderstanding everything." I didn't bother responding. What was there to misunderstand? She cheated, got pregnant, and lied about it. End of story. I spent a lot of time with my family in those first few weeks. My mom, being the nurturing force she is, made sure I was eating and sleeping. My sisters were more direct, saying things like, "Dude, she's trash," and "She doesn't deserve a second of your time." They were blunt, but it helped. They reminded me that I wasn't the problem. She was. To keep myself busy, I threw myself into work, picking up extra shifts at the factory, not just to distract myself, but to rebuild my savings. The money I'd spent on the ring was gone, but that didn't sting as much as losing the life I thought I was building with Casey. I realized I needed to refocus on myself, so I started doing things I hadn't done in a while. I joined a local baseball league, reconnected with friends, and even tried learning how to cook. Spoiler, I'm still terrible at it, but it's fun. Slowly but surely, I felt like I was starting to heal. Then, in mid-2020, I got some unexpected news. A mutual friend texted me out of the blue, saying, "Hey, did you hear about Casey?" I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. The friend told me that Casey's affair partner had ghosted her after finding out he was the father of her baby. Apparently, he wanted nothing to do with her or the child. Casey was now a single mom, trying to figure things out on her own. My reaction? Honestly, I didn't feel much. A tiny part of me felt satisfied, like, that's what you get. But mostly I just felt indifferent. Her drama wasn't my problem anymore, and I was relieved to be out of the mess. A couple of months later, Casey somehow got my new number. She called, begging to talk. I don't know why I answered, but I regretted it immediately. She launched into an apology, saying she'd made a mistake and wanted to explain. I let her ramble for a bit before cutting her off. "Casey," I said, "I don't care anymore. Whatever you have to say won't change anything. We're done." That's when she switched tactics, guilt-tripping me, saying I owed her this and that. I was being unfair by refusing to hear her out. I told her flatly, "I don't owe you anything. You made your choices. Now live with them." Then I hung up. Not long after, Jane decided to get involved. She sent me a string of texts calling me a coward and saying I was running away from my responsibilities. I couldn't believe the audacity. Responsibilities? I wasn't the one who cheated. I wasn't the one who got someone else pregnant. I blocked her number. For a while, it felt like they were everywhere, trying to drag me back into their chaos. But every time they reached out, it only solidified my decision to cut them off. I didn't want or need their explanations. I didn't want closure. I just wanted to move on. And eventually, I did. The calls stopped, the texts stopped, and my days started feeling lighter. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my life again. Mother's Day rolled around, and I was looking forward to spending it with my mom and one of my sisters, Raven. My mom has always been the heart of our family, and after everything that happened, I wanted to make the day special for her. We decided to have lunch at Red Lobster because seafood is her favorite. It was supposed to be a calm, drama-free day. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. We were finishing up and about to leave when I saw them. Jane and Sherry, of all people, in all places. They had to show up there. My stomach dropped. Sherry looked like she wanted to sink into the floor when she saw me, but Jane locked eyes with me and immediately had her usual look of disdain. I could feel Raven tensing up beside me. She's always been protective of me, and I knew she was ready to go off. Jane's expression changed the moment she noticed Raven. She looked confused, almost shocked, like she was piecing something together. I realized she must have finally figured out that Raven was my sister, the same other woman she had accused me of cheating with. The audacity of it all made me want to laugh. Raven muttered under her breath, "Do you want me to handle her?" I shook my head. The last thing I wanted was a public scene. My mom gave Jane a cold, hard look before nudging me forward. "Let's just go," she said. But then Sherry stepped forward, practically begging, "Please, can we talk? Just for a minute alone." Raven wasn't having it. "Why would he want to talk to you?" she snapped. Sherry looked genuinely upset, and my mom stepped in, suggesting that I hear her out, away from Jane. I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else. Sherry pulled me aside far enough that Jane couldn't hear us. She immediately apologized for everything that had happened. "I'm so sorry for how things turned out," she said. "I miss having you around. You were like a brother to me." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and let her continue. She told me Casey had been miserable since I left, crying all the time and saying she regretted everything. "I'm sorry she's struggling," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "But that's not my problem anymore. She made her choices." Sherry nodded, then told me something that made my stomach twist. "She destroyed the laptop you gave me," she said quietly. "It happened right after you left. She was mad at me for telling you the truth." That hurt. I'd given her that laptop out of genuine care, and Casey ruined it out of spite. Before I left, I asked Sherry a question that had been bothering me since Christmas. "Why does your mom hate me so much? What did I ever do to her?" Sherry hesitated, then admitted, "She thought you were cheating. She saw you with another woman, Raven. She didn't know you were siblings." My jaw dropped. All of this, the cheating, the pregnancy, the heartbreak, started because Jane jumped to conclusions and convinced Casey I was unfaithful. I couldn't help but laugh. It was so stupid, so unnecessary, and yet it ruined everything. "Thanks for telling me," I said. "And hey, the laptop's warranty is still good. You can probably get it fixed." Sherry's face lit up, and for a moment I saw the kind, shy girl I used to know. We hugged briefly, and I left to rejoin my mom and Raven. When I told them what Sherry had said, Raven rolled her eyes. "So Jane's not just a jerk, she's also an idiot. Good to know." My mom sighed and said, "Michael, you're better off without those people in your life." She was right. I'd spent so much time trying to make things work with Casey and her family, but it was clear now that they were never worth the effort. A few days after running into Sherry and Jane at Red Lobster, Sherry called me. She wanted help with the laptop warranty I'd mentioned, and since she'd been one of the few decent people in that family, I agreed to meet her at a local electronics store. When I got there, Max was with her, which was a nice surprise. Max had always been solid. Out of all the chaos, he'd been the only one to offer me a genuine apology on Christmas. We chatted while sorting out the laptop. Max thanked me again for the grill I'd given him and said how much he loved using it. Sherry was quieter but seemed relieved to have someone helping her out. It felt nice, almost normal. Afterward, Max suggested we grab lunch together as a thank you. I agreed, thinking it would be a good chance to catch up. We headed to a small nearby restaurant, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't preoccupied with thoughts of Casey or the drama. Max shared his plans to renovate their backyard, and Sherry talked about how school was going, though it was clear she was still dealing with tension at home. Surprisingly, it turned out to be a pleasant time. Just as we were finishing, I heard someone call my name. I looked up, and there she was, Casey. My heart sank. She looked worn out, stressed, and like she'd aged years since I last saw her. Part of me felt sorry for her, but the other part was annoyed that she'd shown up and ruined what had been a peaceful afternoon. "Hi," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at Max and Sherry, then back at me. "Can we talk?" I stayed seated and crossed my arms. "What do you want, Casey?" She hesitated, then stepped closer. "I just want to explain, please. I've been trying to talk to you for months." I sighed. You've got 5 minutes. Go. She launched into an apology, saying she'd made a mistake and regretted everything. I was confused, she said. My mom convinced me you were cheating. She said she saw you with another woman. I cut her off. You mean my sister? That's who Jane saw. Raven is my sister, Casey. If you'd bothered to ask instead of jumping to conclusions, we wouldn't even be here right now. Casey's face fell. I didn't know, she trailed off, looking completely lost. I should have talked to you. You just cheated, I said flatly. For almost a year. Instead of trusting me, you lied, slept with someone else, and got pregnant. And you expect me to care about your excuses now. Her voice cracked as she said, I wasn't happy. I didn't know what to do. You could have talked to me, I snapped. You could have ended things if you weren't happy. But instead, you went behind my back. That's on you. Max and Sherry sat there awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Casey started crying, which might have worked on me years ago, but not anymore. Please, she begged. I want to fix this. I'll do anything. I shook my head. There's nothing to fix, Casey. You destroyed everything. I've moved on, and so should you. That's when she dropped the real bomb. But my son, he needs a father. He needs stability. I blinked, stunned by the audacity. Your son is not my responsibility. That's for you and his actual father to figure out. Oh, wait. He ran off, didn't he? Sounds like a pattern. Casey flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she looked at me with tear-filled eyes and said, Why are you being so mean? Mean, I repeated. Casey, I worked overtime to save for a ring because I thought we had a future together. I planned to buy a house for us, to start a family with you, and you threw it all away. You don't get to call me mean for refusing to clean up your mess. She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Max finally stepped in. Casey, I think it's time to go. You need to respect his boundaries. She turned to Sherry, desperate for backup. Sherry, you understand, don't you? You know I regret everything. Sherry hesitated, then said, Casey, you're my sister and I love you. But you made your choices. You can't expect him to just forget everything. Casey stared at her like she'd been betrayed, then stormed out of the restaurant. I sat there, stunned and exhausted, while Max apologized again. I'm sorry she showed up, he said. You've been through enough. It's not your fault, I replied. You and Sherry have been decent through all of this. That's more than I can say for the rest of your family. After lunch, I went home and told my family what happened. My dad laughed and said, Jane probably thought kicking you out would solve her problems. Look how well that worked out for them. My mom just hugged me and said, I'm proud of you for standing your ground. You deserve better. I realized then that Casey's apologies didn't matter. I didn't need closure from her. I'd already given myself that by walking away. After that confrontation with Casey, I thought I'd feel something. Relief, satisfaction, maybe even a sense of finality. But honestly, it felt empty. Closure wasn't what I expected. It wasn't neat, and it didn't magically make everything better. Instead, it just reminded me of how much damage had been done and how pointless it all was. A couple of days later, Sherry sent me a text, thanking me for hearing her out and helping with the laptop. She said, I really miss having you around. You were like the brother I never had. That hit me harder than I thought it would. I told her I appreciated her honesty and that she didn't owe me an apology for Casey's mess. If anything, she'd been the only one in that family who acted with integrity. Hearing from Sherry made me reflect on how much I'd lost, not just with Casey, but with the parts of her family I'd grown close to. Max had always treated me with respect, and Sherry genuinely looked up to me. I didn't realize how much I missed having people like them in my life until that lunch, but I also knew staying in touch with them would mean risking Casey finding ways to worm back into my life, and I wasn't willing to let that happen. A week later, a mutual acquaintance reached out to tell me more about Casey. Apparently, she was still trying to contact old friends of mine, hoping they'd convince me to talk to her. She was struggling as a single mom, juggling work and raising her son alone after her affair partner completely ghosted her. I didn't feel vindicated hearing this. If anything, it just made me more certain I'd made the right choice by walking away. Her life was her responsibility now, and I wanted no part of it. Then there was Jane. I'd expected her to double down on her hatred for me, but surprisingly, she'd gone quiet. I guess the confrontation at Red Lobster left her with nothing else to say, or maybe she realized how much damage her lies had caused. Either way, I was relieved to be free of her meddling. One thing Casey said during the confrontation stuck with me, though. She claimed she only cheated because Jane convinced her I was unfaithful. At first, I brushed it off as another excuse, but the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Jane had been meddling in our relationship from the beginning, planting seeds of doubt and encouraging Casey to find someone better. But Casey wasn't an innocent victim in all of this. She made the choice to cheat. She made the choice to hide it. And she made the choice to try and lie her way out of it when she got caught. In the end, it didn't matter who was more at fault. Jane and Casey were both toxic in their own ways, and I was better off without either of them. That night, I sat down with my family and told them everything. My dad chuckled and said, "Jane was looking for any excuse to get rid of you. That woman was always full of it." Raven smirked and added, "And yet, you're the one who came out ahead." Casey's stuck raising a kid alone, and Jane's probably tearing her hair out trying to fix things. Meanwhile, you've got a clean slate. That's a win. My mom, as always, was the voice of reason. She hugged me and said, "Michael, I'm proud of you for standing your ground. You didn't let them manipulate you, and that takes strength." I thought things were finally done with Casey and her family. I had moved on, found peace, and was focusing on myself. But of course, Jane wasn't about to let things end quietly. A few weeks after the confrontation with Casey, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Michael, it's Jane." Her sharp voice came through the line. I almost hung up right there, but curiosity got the better of me. What could she possibly want now? "What do you want, Jane?" I said, already annoyed. "We need to talk," she snapped, as if she was the one doing me a favor by calling. "It's about Casey and the baby." I sighed. "There's nothing to talk about. I've made my position clear. Goodbye." "Jane, wait," she barked before I could hang up. "I'm not asking you to get back with Casey. I just think you should take responsibility for your part in this mess." That got my attention. "My part?" I asked, incredulous. "What part is that, Jane? I wasn't the one who cheated. I wasn't the one who lied. So please enlighten me." Jane let out an exasperated sigh as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Casey is struggling. She's a single mother because of a misunderstanding that could have been avoided if you just explained things to me from the start." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you seriously blaming me for Casey's affair? You were the one who introduced her to the guy. You were the one who convinced her I was cheating. Don't put this on me." Jane ignored my words entirely. "That baby needs a father, Michael. You were practically part of the family for years. It's time you stepped up and helped. If not for Casey, then for the child." I was so stunned I didn't know how to respond at first. When I finally found my voice, I said, "Jane, let me make this crystal clear. That baby is not mine. I owe you, Casey, and her kid absolutely nothing. And if you call me again, I'll block you just like I did before." "You selfish boy," she hissed. "Do you think you'll ever find someone better than Casey? She made a mistake, but she's still the best you'll ever do. You're throwing away a good woman over something so trivial." That did it. I laughed, an actual deep belly laugh, because it was so ridiculous. "Trivial?" I repeated. "Cheating for almost a year, lying about a pregnancy, and trying to manipulate me into staying. That's trivial to you. No wonder your family is such a mess. Before she could respond, I hung up and immediately blocked her number. I thought that would be the end of it, but Jane wasn't done. The next day, I got a call from Max. He sounded tired and stressed, which was unusual for him. "Michael, I need to apologize in advance," he said. "Jane's been out of control. She's planning to come to your workplace." "What?" I asked, completely caught off guard. "Why would she do that?" "She says you need to face her and take responsibility," Max explained. "I've tried talking her out of it, but you know how she is." I groaned, already dreading the confrontation. Sure enough, later that afternoon, Jane showed up at my job. She stormed into the office, demanding to see me. Thankfully, my manager intercepted her and asked what she wanted. "I need to speak to Michael," Jane said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's a private family matter." I was in the back, but I could hear her clear as day. My manager came to get me, looking concerned. "Do you know this woman?" she asked. "Unfortunately, yes," I said. "I'll handle it." When I walked out to meet Jane, she immediately started her tirade. "You've been ignoring me, and I won't stand for it," she said, glaring at me like I was a misbehaving child. "You're going to listen to what I have to say." "No, I'm not," I replied. "You're on private property, and you're disrupting my workplace. Leave now, or I'll have security escort you out." That only made her angrier. "You can't just ignore your responsibilities, Michael. I'll tell everyone here what kind of man you really are." I crossed my arms. "Go ahead. Tell them how your daughter cheated on me, lied about her pregnancy, and tried to manipulate me. See how much sympathy you get." Jane's face turned red, and for a moment I thought she might actually explode. "You're a pathetic excuse for a man," she spat. "I hope you end up alone because no decent woman will ever want you." Before I could respond, security arrived and escorted her out. My co-workers were obviously curious, but I just shrugged it off, saying, "Crazy ex's mom." Long story? They didn't press further. Later that night, I got a text from Sherry. She apologized profusely for her mom's behavior and said Max was furious with Jane for embarrassing their family. "She's out of control," Sherry wrote. "Max is thinking about filing for divorce because of this." I told Sherry it wasn't her fault and that I didn't blame Max for wanting out. Jane had caused nothing but chaos, and honestly, I felt bad for him. The whole situation left me emotionally drained, but it also reinforced one thing. I made the right decision by cutting Casey and her family out of my life. They were toxic, entitled, and incapable of taking responsibility for their actions. And I wasn't about to let them drag me down with them.